No one said it out loud, but everyone in the room was already deciding. The gym was quiet in that particular way only fighters understand. No music, no chatter, just the soft sound of breathing and the dull thud of bare feet on mat. It was late afternoon, light cutting through high windows, dust hanging in the air like it was waiting for something to happen. Bruce Lee stood near the mirrors, relaxed, hands loose, posture effortless. He looked smaller than most men in the room. Lean, calm, almost casual. Chuck Norris stood across from him, tightening his wraps. Broader, heavier, built like a man who could end arguments with structure alone. Years of competition had shaped him into something solid, undeniable. Power you could see without asking. No one announced a match. No gloves. No referee. No challenge. Just two men sharing space. And space, Bruce believed, always tells the truth. A student whispered to another, barely audible. If it came down to it, who do you think? The question lingered, unclaimed. Bruce moved first, not toward Chuck, but around the room, testing distance, adjusting angles with his eyes. Chuck noticed. He always noticed. Power fighters learn awareness early, because speed punishes ignorance. Chuck finished wrapping his hands and looked up. Their eyes met. Not hostile, not friendly, curious. You're fast, Chuck said finally. Bruce smiled slightly. You're strong. Neither statement was a compliment. Both were acknowledgments. The room felt smaller now, as if walls had crept inward to listen. Someone expected a clash. Someone else expected a demonstration. But Bruce wasn't interested in proving anything yet. Chuck wasn't either. This wasn't about ego. It was about a question every fighter eventually asks, and few ever answer honestly. When it really comes down to it, does speed win, or does power? No one realized it yet, but the answer wasn't going to come from a punch. It was going to come from what happened next. They didn't square up. That alone confused the onlookers. Chuck rolled his shoulders once, feeling the weight of his own arms settle. Years of karate tournaments had taught him how to generate force from structure. Hips locked, spine aligned, strikes built to break through resistance. His power wasn't rushed. It was stored. Bruce watched him the way a musician watches another musician tune an instrument. You hit like you expect resistance, Bruce said casually. Chuck raised an eyebrow. You don't. Bruce shook his head. I expect absence. That sentence landed harder than it should have. A few students exchanged looks. Absence wasn't something they trained for. You trained for contact, impact, clash. Chuck stepped forward, not attacking, testing range. Bruce didn't retreat. He adjusted by inches, staying just outside the line where Chuck's power lived. Close enough to be threatened, far enough to be safe. Show me, Chuck said. Bruce nodded. He lifted his hand, not striking, then dropped it again. Nothing happened. Somebody laughed, uncertain. Then Bruce did it again, this time stepping in half a beat earlier. Chuck felt the air move near his chest before his mind caught up. No contact, just pressure, presence. That's speed, Bruce said. It arrives before power finishes deciding. Chuck exhaled slowly. He wasn't offended. He was intrigued. He stepped in again. Faster this time, shoulders turning, hips loading. Bruce slipped inside the arc. Not away. His forearm brushing Chuck's sleeve, redirecting force like it had never been aimed at him. No strike, no impact, but Chuck's balance shifted. He recovered instantly, smiling now. You don't fight where the strike is, he said. You fight where it's going to be. Bruce smiled back. And you don't waste movement. Respect settled between them. Around them, the room grew quiet again. Not because they expected violence, but because they were watching two different languages try to translate each other. Speed speaking in fractions. Power speaking in certainty. And both realizing the conversation was just getting interesting. Chuck decided it was time to stop theorizing. Not to attack, but to apply pressure. He stepped forward again, this time committing just enough to make the space honest. His lead leg grounded. His shoulders set. Bruce felt it immediately, the difference between curiosity and intent. Power doesn't always arrive violently. Sometimes it arrives heavy. Chuck threw a controlled kick. Not full force. Not a finisher. A question. Bruce answered by not being there. His foot slid back less than a hand's width, hips turning just enough to let the kick pass through empty air. No jump. No rush. Efficiency. The kick landed where Bruce had been a fraction of a second earlier. Chuck nodded. Fast, he said. Bruce didn't respond. He stepped in. Not to strike. To occupy. His presence closed the distance so quickly that Chuck felt crowded before his eyes fully registered it. Bruce's forearm touched Chuck's chest lightly. Just contact. No force. But the message was clear. If this were real, the exchange would already be over. Chuck reset his stance, more alert now. His breathing changed. Slower. Deeper. He wasn't chasing speed anymore. He was waiting for it. You don't give time, Chuck said. Bruce tilted his head slightly. Time is the opponent. Chuck smiled. Then let's see who controls it. They circled once. Twice. The room followed their movement like a pendulum. Chuck stepped in hard this time, shoulders driving, intent unmistakable. Bruce slipped inside the line again, his movement so tight it looked like coincidence. His hand stopped inches from Chuck's throat. Stopped. Deliberately. No contact. The room exhaled. Chuck looked down at the hand, then back up at Bruce. No embarrassment. No frustration. Understanding. So that's speed, Chuck said quietly. Bruce lowered his hand. That's timing. Power hadn't lost, but it had just learned something important. Chuck Norris didn't rush again. That was the biggest shift in the room. Power fighters are taught to impose themselves, to make others react. But Chuck understood something important in that moment. Reacting to speed was a mistake. Speed feeds on reaction. So instead of chasing Bruce, he grounded himself. Feet planted. Breath steady. Muscles relaxed but ready. Bruce noticed immediately. That's dangerous, Bruce said calmly. Chuck smirked. Good. Chuck stepped in again, slower than before but heavier. Every inch of his movement carried intent. This wasn't about landing first. This was about landing through. He threw a straight punch, not fast by Bruce's standards, but honest. No feint. No disguise. Pure structure. Bruce moved. Not back. Inside. The punch brushed past his shoulder, missing by centimeters. Bruce's body rotated like a door on a hinge, hips turning, spine aligned, feet whispering against the mat. His palm touched Chuck's ribs lightly, almost respectfully. Chuck felt it. Not pain. Pressure. The kind that tells you your structure has been accessed. If that had been force, Chuck said, I'd feel it tomorrow. Bruce nodded. And if it had been real, you wouldn't feel it at all. That answer lingered. Chuck reset again, slower now, testing angles instead of distance. He began cutting space, not chasing Bruce but narrowing options. This was where power lived best, in inevitability. Bruce adjusted. His speed didn't increase. It disappeared. He began moving less, waiting more, letting Chuck's mass commit just enough before stepping into the gap it created. The students were quiet now. Not impressed. Not shocked. Focused. They were watching two philosophies collide without ever touching fully. One built on force refined through repetition. The other built on timing refined through awareness. Chuck stopped suddenly. So, he said, if this were real, what ends it? Bruce looked at him. The first mistake. Chuck smiled slowly. And who makes it? Bruce answered without hesitation. The one who believes too much in what he already has. The room understood. This wasn't speed versus power anymore. It was adaptation versus certainty. Chuck Norris shifted his stance again, but this time the change wasn't physical. It was mental. He stopped thinking about landing something, stopped thinking about proving power. Instead, he focused on presence, occupying space, closing doors, making Bruce uncomfortable without throwing a single strike. Power at its highest level doesn't rush. It waits and lets inevitability do the work. Bruce felt the pressure immediately. Not danger, constraint. Chuck advanced in small increments, cutting angles, herding Bruce toward the edge of the mat. Every step was measured. No wasted motion. No impatience. The room sensed it too. This wasn't the Chuck Norris of tournaments and highlight reels. This was something quieter. Smarter. "You're adapting," Bruce said. Chuck didn't answer. He kept moving. Bruce tested him with a half-step feint. Nothing committed. Chuck didn't bite. His guard stayed disciplined. His balance stayed centered. That restraint changed the rhythm of the room. For the first time, speed didn't dominate the exchange. Bruce circled, looking for an opening that wasn't there yet. Chuck had learned the lesson Bruce lived by: don't chase what you can contain. Then Bruce smiled. "Good," he said. "Now it's honest." Bruce shifted his approach. Instead of moving first, he waited. Instead of slipping away, he let Chuck come just close enough. The distance shrank to something dangerous, inside kicking range, inside comfortable punching range. Chuck stepped in. Bruce didn't move. That pause, the briefest hesitation, was all Chuck needed. He launched a short, compact strike, powered by structure, hips turning cleanly, shoulders aligned. Not explosive, relentless. Bruce intercepted, not with speed, but with position. His forearm met Chuck's bicep at the exact point where leverage failed. The strike lost its spine. Bruce's other hand settled on Chuck's shoulder, redirecting mass instead of opposing it. Chuck's momentum carried him forward half a step farther than he intended. Bruce stepped aside. No clash. No block. Just a quiet correction. Chuck stopped and laughed softly. Not mockery. Appreciation. "So that's it," he said. "Speed isn't about moving fast. It's about arriving early." Bruce nodded. "And power isn't about force. It's about commitment." The room leaned in. Because now, neither man was defending his strength. They were borrowing from each other. The shift was subtle, but everyone felt it. Bruce Lee stopped circling. That alone changed the rhythm of the room. Speed fighters usually live in motion, angles, steps, constant adjustment. But Bruce suddenly reduced his movement, as if deciding the space no longer needed negotiation. He planted his feet more often. Let Chuck come closer. Let weight enter the conversation. Chuck noticed immediately. "You're not avoiding anymore," he said. Bruce nodded. "Because now you're listening." Chuck stepped in again, but slower this time, testing pressure rather than impact. His presence filled the space in front of him, wide shoulders narrowing the available exits. This was where power usually ended discussions, by making options disappear. Bruce didn't retreat. Instead, he settled. His knees softened, his spine aligned, his breathing slowed. To the untrained eye, it looked like he was giving ground internally. To Chuck, it looked dangerous. Chuck threw a short hook. Not full force, but committed enough to matter. Bruce didn't evade. He absorbed the line of attack with structure, rotating his torso just enough to let the strike slide past his center. At the same time, his weight dropped. Chuck felt it immediately. Not pain. Pressure again. Bruce's body felt heavier than it looked. Not rigid, connected. As if his mass had suddenly increased without warning. "That's new," Chuck said quietly. Bruce replied, "Speed without weight is noise." Chuck exhaled slowly. He reset his stance, reconsidering distance, reconsidering timing. Power had always been his anchor. Now speed was borrowing it. They moved again, closer than before. Too close for kicks. Too tight for wide punches. Inside fighting range, where mistakes cost the most. Bruce's hand rose. Not striking. Resting lightly against Chuck's chest. "If this were real," Bruce said, "this is where it ends." Chuck looked down at the hand, then back up. "And if I don't let you get there?" he asked. Bruce smiled faintly. "Then you're already learning." The room was silent. Not because they expected a clash, but because they were watching two strengths merge into something neither had brought in alone. Chuck Norris took a step back. Not out of retreat, but recalibration. For years, power had been his language. Structure, repetition, force applied cleanly and without hesitation. But now, something unfamiliar was happening. Bruce wasn't escaping his power anymore. He was sharing space with it, borrowing weight, returning it altered. Chuck rolled his shoulders, loosening tension he hadn't realized he was carrying. "You're not trying to beat strength," he said. "You're making it miss." Bruce shook his head gently. "I'm letting it arrive where it can't live." They closed distance again, slowly, deliberately. The air felt dense, as if movement itself had become expensive. Students around the mat leaned forward, sensing that what mattered now wouldn't look dramatic, but it would be decisive. Chuck initiated with pressure, a forward step that claimed ground without striking. Bruce matched it, not by yielding, but by angling. His lead foot shaving inches, his hips turning just enough to change the conversation. Chuck felt his own momentum reframed, redirected into a path he hadn't chosen. He tried again, this time with a compact strike, elbows tight, force condensed. Bruce met it early, too early, his forearm sealing space before the strike matured. The contact was brief, almost polite, yet it unraveled the attack's intent. Chuck stopped. He smiled, wide and genuine. "So that's the difference," he said. "Power finishes what it starts. Speed decides when things start." Bruce smiled back. "And when they don't?" They stood there, breathing evenly. No one spoke. The room didn't need commentary. What they were watching wasn't competition, it was calibration. Chuck adjusted his stance once more. Lighter now. Less planted. More curious. "Again," he said, not as a challenge, but an invitation. Bruce nodded. This time, when they moved, it wasn't about speed versus power. It was about timing versus expectation. And expectation was losing ground. They moved again, but the room felt different now. Earlier, everyone had been waiting for an answer, speed or power. A winner. A conclusion they could carry home and repeat. But that question had quietly dissolved. What remained was more uncomfortable and more honest. How do you fight someone who isn't trying to win? Chuck advanced, not committing to an attack, but applying presence. His steps were measured, his shoulders relaxed, his hands floating in a guard that could become anything. He wasn't testing Bruce's speed anymore. He was testing himself. Bruce responded by doing less. He let Chuck close the distance to a place most fighters avoid, the range where reactions are too late and strength hasn't fully formed. Bruce's eyes softened, taking in microshifts. A heel lifting too early, a shoulder loading half a beat too soon. Chuck launched a short combination, compact and efficient. Bruce didn't evade it all. He didn't need to. He slipped the first strike, redirected the second, and arrived inside the third, his body already where the punch was supposed to go. No impact, just proximity. Bruce's hand rested lightly against Chuck's collarbone. Fingers relaxed. Not a threat, a fact. "If you commit," Bruce said quietly, "you give me your future." Chuck froze, not because he was trapped, but because he understood. Power requires follow-through. Speed lives before that moment. In the space between intention and execution. Chuck stepped back slowly. He laughed, shaking his head. "I've spent my life finishing," he said. "You spend yours beginning." Bruce lowered his hand. Beginnings decide endings. The students felt it then, the shift from spectacle to lesson. This wasn't about who could hit harder or move faster. It was about where control actually lived. Not in the strike, not in the muscle, but in the moment before both. And in that moment, speed and power stopped being opposites. They became tools. The room had stopped keeping score. No one whispered comparisons anymore. No one leaned toward one side of the mat or the other. The old question, speed or power, felt too small now, like asking which wing matters more to a bird. Chuck Norris wiped his hands on a towel and looked around. He saw it in the students' faces first. Not confusion, not awe, clarity. The kind that settles when an argument ends without anyone raising their voice. "You know," Chuck said, breaking the quiet, "I've won fights by being stronger than the other guy. I've won by being tougher. But this," he gestured between them, "this isn't about winning. Bruce nodded. Winning ends conversations. Chuck smiled. And this one's just getting good. They moved again, slowly, like chess players testing a middle game neither wanted to rush. Chuck used angles now, borrowing a page from Bruce, less force, more placement. Bruce answered by grounding himself more often, letting weight settle through his feet, letting power exist without announcing itself. They met in close range, too close for spectators to see much, but close enough for both men to feel everything. Chuck applied pressure with his shoulder, not striking, just occupying. Bruce accepted it, rotated, and the pressure slid past him like water around stone. Chuck felt it and laughed softly. "You don't resist." Bruce replied, "Resistance feeds force." They separated again, breathing evenly. No one was tired. No one was dominant. And somehow that felt like the point. A student finally spoke from the edge of the room. "So, who wins?" Chuck and Bruce looked at each other, then back at the student. Chuck answered first. "The one who adapts." Bruce added, "Before he has to." The student nodded, as if something heavy had just been set down. The argument was gone. All that remained was understanding. When the session ended, there was no applause. People gathered their bags quietly, not wanting to break the feeling that had settled over the room. The air felt lighter, not because tension had left, but because certainty had. Chuck Norris stood near the mat, hands on his hips, thoughtful. "You know," he said, "people always ask who would win between us." Bruce smiled faintly. "They still will." Chuck laughed. "Let them." He extended his hand. Bruce took it. The grip was firm, equal, no test, no contest. Just acknowledgement. "I came in believing power answers everything," Chuck said. "You showed me it answers questions I didn't know to ask." Bruce shook his head. "And you showed me that power, when it listens, becomes something else." They released hands. Students filed past them, some bowing, some nodding, all carrying the same lesson without fully realizing it yet. Speed hadn't defeated power. Power hadn't overwhelmed speed. They had refined each other. As Bruce laced his shoes, Chuck watched him with a new kind of respect. Not for his speed, but for his restraint. For knowing when not to move, when not to strike, when not to prove. "Next time," Chuck said. "We don't even need a mat." Bruce smiled. "Then we're really practicing." They parted without ceremony. And long after they were gone, the room held onto one truth. The real fight was never speed versus power. It was ego versus understanding. And understanding won without throwing a single punch.